and welcome to the latest episode of Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. I am Jason Johnston Yellen, lover of sandwiches. You over there, you, sir, to whom I am referring, you remain Joshua Hatton. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm glad you finally called upon me because I imagine the listeners are like, what, who, me? Who? You talking to me? I don't see anybody else.
I feel like I've been watching too many police procedurals because I feel like I've put you on the stand this day.
Yeah, where was I on the night of the 15th?
Exactly. That's the question I've been asking. Listen, normally in Extra Extra, you or I bring a normally whiskey-related story to the attention of the other. We read it in the first half, we riff on it in the second half, and we get out of here in a tight 35. And I tell the listeners every episode, you can set your watch by the tightness of that 35 minutes.
That's a very tight 35 minutes.
I tell you. And for the edification of our dear listeners, you will text me as you complete the edit, and you will invariably say, this episode is 37 minutes and 1 second. And I will invariably write back and say, sounds like a tight 35 to me.
Every time. All the time.
Set your watch by it. All right. So I told you before we jumped in here today that I had a tight plan for the recording.
Yeah, you wouldn't even tell me anything about it. I'm just here clueless.
Believe it or not, I have 2 whiskey-related news articles to read to you today.
Okay.
Before we riff on them in the second half. I also want to say, one of our dear listeners, Bert Bumgartner, I had the pleasure of spending some time in Scotland recently with Bert, and I'll be spending some time with him in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness later this month of June as well. And as we were driving, he said to me, I want to bring up something about Extra Extra. And I said, please do. Oh. And he said, it drives me crazy, which is never a good start. It drives me crazy when you and or Joshua talk about being unable to read these articles because pop-ups keep happening.
Yes.
Ads are appearing, videos are appearing, and we always communicate that to our dear listeners. He said, why do you never hit reader view?
Hit what? Reader. Oh, reader view.
Well, there's an answer for Bert. Hit what now? Who now? And so since I've returned from Scotland and I've been looking at articles online, all being bombarded with ads and all that, I just hit reader view and it all goes away and you just read the words.
I don't even know how to do that. How does one hit reader review? Is there a button on your keyboard that you type in the words reader view and then hit enter?
There's a little button. I can't find it right now, but
can't find the button.
Yeah, you just hit it. You just hit it. There's something there. Reader view. Oh, that's what it is. So if you're in your browser and you go up to view, there will be one that says show reader. And then you just, boom, you hit that, and you go into reader view.
Can I just unplug it and plug it back in again and see if that helps?
You should see the difference it makes to read online.
That's amazing.
Unbelievable.
Amazing.
So anyway, we're never going to get out of here in a tight 35 if we spend all this time telling people how to turn their browser into a reader view.
I don't know how to do that.
I can tell you in Safari, it just changes the world. It's amazing. So listen, Joshua. You and I have been covering stories recently about new distillery builds, expanding distilleries, expanding visitor centres. Today, we answer the question of, with all these expanding distilleries, what are they doing with all of this distillate? Yeah. So our first article comes from the Herald. It was sent to me by Jess Lomas.
All right. So that the Herald is it's a Scottish publication, right?
It is indeed Scottish publication. And both of these, or each of these articles, come from the 8th and 9th of June. So a little bit earlier in the month.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But only really a couple of weeks ago
Yeah.
from where this episode lives. So the article by Brian Donnelly, who is the business correspondent for the Herald, is entitled Dalmeny Royal Elizabeth Yard Whiskey Plan.
Dalmeny?
Dalmeny.
Okay.
Dalmeny.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Plans to develop a huge whiskey facility at a former military site on the outskirts of the Scottish capital have been unveiled. I'll tell you something else that happened while I was in Scotland. My brother said, I want to tell you something about extra.
Oh, right.
And I said, oh, okay, yeah, go on. And he said, it drives me nuts. And I thought, oh, I've heard this somewhere before. He said, why don't you and Joshua just focus on getting through the reading of the article in the first half and save all your riffing to the second half? Why do you keep pausing during the reading? And I said to him, well, it kind of breaks up, right? We're just reading sentences on a podcast. It kind of breaks it up a little bit.
Yeah.
He said, no, just read it. Just read it and then get on to the breakup stuff. That's what I'm here for. I was like, all right, Muddy, calm down. And so that just popped into my head because as I'm reading plans to develop a huge whiskey facility, I was going to make a little comment that huge is a good journalistic word. Like, I love the nebulous nature of huge.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing attached to it. I mean, yes, there is something, but it is nebulous. It could be anything. From whose perspective?
Huge.
Yeah, anyway. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? No, spot on.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought, okay, I won't say that because that makes Murray upset. So Jason will remain focused here.
Okay.
Royal Elizabeth Bond has launched a consultation on proposals to develop bonded and maturation warehouse space at Royal Elizabeth Yard at Dalmeny near Edinburgh. The developer said, our emerging proposals seek to respond to significant market demand for bonded and maturation warehouse accommodation in central Scotland. The quote continues, the ongoing expansion of the whisky industry has left the market with a shortage of accommodation, with particular impacts for smaller independent distillers. One may also add bottlers. It continued, the quote continues, in addition, the increasing challenges that the industry is facing regarding stricter regulations relating to the storage of alcohol, combined with the increasing constraints of existing sites, has led to there being significant demand for purpose-built and regulatory compliant warehouse accommodation. The quote continues, as such, our emerging proposals present an opportunity to provide a key piece of infrastructure for the Scotch whisky industry, which contributes £5.5 billion in gross value added to the UK economy and supports over 42,000 jobs. The proposal site comprises the existing Royal Elizabeth Yard Industrial Estate at Standing Stane Road and Milton Farm Road. The site has been in commercial use since at least the 1940s, when it was developed as a depot. Some people say depot. I go with depot.
Yeah, I go depot. Yeah, dig a little depot.
Who's the band? Devo, or is it Devo?
It's sure as hell not Devo.
So the site has been in commercial use since at least the 1940s, when it was developed as a depot to supply food and beverages to the Royal Navy at Rosyth. Royal Elizabeth Yard has 17,663 square metres of business and industrial accommodation, together with associated parking, yard and other external areas. There are currently 37 business premises within Royal Elizabeth Yard, comprising 8 large warehouse buildings and a series of smaller business premises. Final paragraph. The Royal Elizabeth Yard is, quote, well suited in terms of meeting the necessary regulatory and security requirements for the storage of spirit, end quote, said the developer.
So, more warehousing going in for anybody to be using.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. So there's a few bits and bobs I'm going to add to this in the second half.
Okay.
We're going to jump over to the Associated Press here.
Oh, okay. I've heard of them.
Yeah, it's a name we don't often get to include on the extra. So this has no journalist attributed to it. It is just attributed to the Associated Press. With the title, Four Rosies Adding Warehouses in Kentucky Expansion.
Okay.
Four Rosies Distillery will expand its Kentucky operations by investing more than $23 million to construct more storage warehouses for its spirits, Governor Andy Beshear said. Work on the new warehouses at Coxey's Creek is expected to be completed by 2024. Four Rosies will build 17 warehouses, totaling more than 776,000 square feet. And the AP has done us a solid here.
Yeah.
72,092 square meters.
Look at them covering bases.
Isn't that helpful?
Look at that.
So if you remember, our Herald article said 17,663 square meters.
Okay.
So 17,500 square meters for the Scotch whiskey outside Edinburgh.
Yeah.
72,000 square meters for the bourbon outside Frankfort, Kentucky.
Wow, that's so very interesting. Because you know what? I'm going to listen to Murray, and I'm gonna hold my thought. I try to please your brother as much as I can. Got to placate him.
So just to reiterate the paragraph we're halfway through. Four Rosies will build 17 warehouses totaling more than 776,000 square feet or 72,000 square meters to support continued growth of the Lawrenceburg-based distillery, Beshear's office said Tuesday. Kentucky's bourbon and spirits growth continues at an incredible rate, and we welcome this major investment from Four Rosies, Beshear said. The investment comes in response to increased demand for the company's bourbon throughout the United States. Four Rosies currently employs 137 people in Kentucky, including 20 at an existing warehouse in Coxey's Creek. And now, this is the final paragraph. Since Beshear took office, Kentucky's spirits industry has had more than 50 new location or expansion announcements, resulting in more than $1.1 billion with a B dollars in planned investments and more than 900 announced full-time jobs, the governor's office said. Welcome back to the second half of Extra Extra. Joshua, Morrissey Hatton.
It's glad to be back. What did I say? It's glad to be back. I'm glad to be back.
Glad to be back. I'm glad to be back. So,
Yes.
the reason that our dear Jess had sent the Herald article to me via text is that when she and I were driving around Scotland, we were at Royal Elizabeth Yard. We were on site there, looking at casks, listening to some plans for casks,
Okay.
being told about the Royal Navy history within the building. Now, there's a few things to say here. Number one, it's a huge spot. It's a huge amount of land, and these 37 business premises that they describe here, those are a mix of large and small warehouse spaces. And so when the article talks about comprising 8 large warehouse buildings and a series of smaller business premises, you could knock some things together. You could, obviously, if you're storing whiskey, there's regulations about firewalls and fire doors and explosive switches, and there are some very real considerations there. Also, as the article says, there's talk about security as well.
Sure.
All of this needs to be significantly locked down. But the yard itself is a good size. To then compare this 17,500 square meters with what's being described as 72,000 square meters for the Four Roses, 17 warehouses, it's an astronomical difference.
So I love your use of the word huge before, because as you were saying it, it's a huge spot. I'm trying to well, what exactly does huge mean? But then you put a finer point on it, right? You said 8 warehouses. And so
8 large warehouses.
8 large warehouses. And so that's
If we're going to continue with huge, we're going to continue with large.
so that is 8 very large warehouses, 17,000 square meters. And then with Four Roses, it's 17 warehouses with 72,000 meters of square footage. Now, one thing I know about Four Roses' current maturation, their current warehouses, is that unlike, say, Wild Turkey or Heaven Hill or some of the other producers, they don't have multi-floor warehouses, these rick houses. Theirs is a bit closer to that of dunnage, right? So that's going to be quite sprawling. When you were in Scotland looking at those, was it dunnage? Was it palletized? Was it racked? What was the deal there?
I'm so glad you asked the question, because I was going to volunteer the information. So we're thinking alike here, which always makes me happy. There were a number of palletized warehouses in effect.
Okay.
And then a smaller warehouse space that was being used for 3 high. It's not dunnage, it's concrete floor.
Yeah.
But they were cast on their side, 3 high, recognizable as you're describing here as dunnage style.
Yeah, it just quickly for our listeners again, if you're not familiar with the term dunnage, it's a warehouse with a dirt floor. Typically, casks are sitting 3 to 4 casks high, and that's it. Whereas palletized, the roof could be much higher. You don't necessarily have a dirt floor, and you could just stack those casks pallet upon pallet upon pallet. Now, I remember going to Bruichladdich and seeing all sorts of maturation styles, but their pallets went up really high.
Exactly.
And so by really high, I don't know. I'll take a stab in the dark and say likely higher than 5 pallets high. Likely higher, right?
Oh, I think they've I think at Bruichladdich they've even talked about like 10 and 11.
There you go. So comparing this to that, is it similar to what Bruichladdich are doing, 10, 11 pallets high?
I don't want to say quite
guess.
that high, but we definitely saw 5 and 6. Definitely. Easily saw 5 and 6.
Okay, and so you may not know the answer to this question. I'm sure maybe one of our listeners will. And I should know the answer to this question because I used to work in warehousing, or I used to sell products for warehousing purposes, is when you're judging your square footage, is that both side to side and up and down? Is your square footage from floor to ceiling? It's not.
No. Your square footage is just your floor plan.
Okay, so now, so we're digging deeper here. So because it surprised me when you said, here's 17,000 square meters for anybody to use, and here's 72,000 square meters specifically for Four Roses to use. It almost sounded as if, boy, you guys over in Scotland need to up your game, because look at what this one distillery is doing while you guys are building general storage for a multitude. But it sounds like you can go a bit higher, so you can likely get a lot more casks in there.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But the other thing that continually strikes me, and you know this, and Jess knows this, I know this, many of our listeners know this, you simply cannot build warehouse space fast enough.
Yep.
In Scotland or in Kentucky, or if you're a growing distiller, with a decade under your belt in America. And it's so interesting in speaking to so many bottlers, distillers, storage people, storage facilities. Everybody thinks the next big warehouse they build will be the one that solves all their problems.
Nope.
And as soon as it's complete, it gets filled immediately. And they say, yeah, we've actually, started plans for the next big warehouse, and it'll be bigger than the big one we just opened. It's like, yeah, everybody needs space. Storage is absolutely at a premium.
Yep.
And as the Herald article says, storage that meets regulations and security is at a premium, just simply at a premium right now. I also, from being at Royal Elizabeth Yard, I believe anything that goes in there will just be for hard and fast storage. I don't, especially, in a palletized warehouse, you don't put things in there and keep a very close eye on them. You invariably say, this is liquid that we're not going to touch for 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever it happens to be. You're not watching it every 3 months. You're not putting experiments in there. You're putting in an 18-wheel truck. It's driving down there. It's being stored, and then it's being retrieved some number of years in the future. Which then brings me to a point that I first thought when I read it, and Jess first thought when she read it, and there's only 3 comments on this article, and one of the comments is about this as well, which is Standing Stane Road and Milton Farm Road. The clue is in that second name there. They are a schlep from Edinburgh. They're 20, 30 minutes by taxi outside of Edinburgh. And you end up going through countryside to get there. I looked at Jess. Jess had actually been there previously. And as we're in the back of the taxi, I'm saying to her, is this right? And the guy driving the taxi is like, is this right? Is GPS really sending us to the right place here?
Yeah.
There are some tight, narrow roads. The infrastructure might be in place for the regulatory and security requirements. They're not in place for heavy goods vehicles driving in and out with loads of filled casks. That's going to be part of that build out over
The
there.
infrastructure, the widening of roads.
Oh
That's
yeah.
up, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because and actually I learned this from the person who put it in the comments.
Yep.
The yard with that history with the Navy was served by rail. The rail line went to and from the yard. And so they didn't have to worry about the road. It was all on the train.
Did the rail bring the milkshakes to the yard or just the boys?
Jeez Louise. I was listening so carefully there, like, okay, I wonder what my answer is going to be to this question. Do I know if the rail link is still in place? I don't think it is. Do I know if the tracks are still in place? No, I don't think they are. I think they got removed as well. Oh, does the rail bring all the milkshake to the yard? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
But now for a serious question. Well, not a question necessarily, but just sort of an observation. I remember 10, 12 years ago, either through Malt Whiskey Yearbook or some publication, which talked about the general number of casks that would be in Scotland year over year. And it seemed to average 20 million casks of whiskey, of which 95% of them were bourbon barrels or bourbon hogsheads. And over the past 10 to 12 years, I've heard that number creep up and creep up and creep up to near on 25 million casks of whiskey in Scotland. I don't know the number of casks for the U.S., but when I think about the growth of whiskey within Scotland as it's compared to the U.S., yes, Scotland is growing. I mean, we just talked about it in the last Extra, where there's plans for X number of Campbelltown distilleries and this distillery and that distillery growing. But here in the U.S., you're dealing with about 3,000 micro distilleries, not including the big boys. I don't think these micro distilleries will ever, most of them, get to the point where they need a massive amount of storage outside of their own use. Unlike some, like what you had mentioned, right? Some of these other distilleries that have been around for 10 years, 12 years, and need to grow their distillery, need to grow their warehouse. It will be interesting to see if we see storage like what we're seeing Scotland doing now, the sort of general warehousing. Right? I know we have our bottling hall in Kentucky that does store for a multitude of people, but that's typically for liquid in process, right? It's not long-term storage like what we're talking about here with Scotland. It's short-term storage because they're about to bottle it. It'd be really interesting to see if we ever get to this point here in the U.S. where we can have centralized long-term storage. My guess is the answer could very well be no, and that's simply due to the geographic differences between the U.S. and Scotland, right? I mean, it'll take you days to drive across the U.S. and a few hours to drive across Scotland, right? So I don't know if it would ever apply, but it'd be interesting to see how things evolve here in the U.S.
Well, the thing that I always go to is how much of the bourbon and rye being matured in the US is hanging out for 2 years in storage.
Right, that's a good point.
And 4 years and 6 years. And then the dwindling numbers that are into 10 and 14 and 20. Whereas in Scotland, here we are, you're a minimum of 3 years. Then maybe you're 8 years. Then maybe you're into your 12s in your traditional age statements. And so you've got casks that are being stored for longer in a country that's the size of the smallest US state.
Yeah, right. Think about a product like Rittenhouse Rye, right? 50% alcohol, 2-year-old rye whiskey that's in every bar and on most people's shelves and just put into every cocktail. Yes, they need a ton of storage for that product, but the inventory keeps rotating because all you need is the 2 years, right? So, yeah, that's a really good point. Because of how we make our whiskey, you don't need that long-term storage.
Do you remember when we were at Bernheim, back when Denny Potter was still there and he showed us around?
I do.
And as we were going through the distilling facility, there was a window we walked past and we looked out, and kind of across the parking lot, there was a brick building that was massive.
Yes.
And they had casks on every single floor.
12 floors high. Yep. 12-floor high warehouse.
I think about that facility all the time. And obviously, my dad was a bricklayer. And I just think of, some of the jobs that he had and some of the buildings that he was at the building of. And I just think of that 12-story brick facility that is only housing casks of whiskey.
Here's, just to add a little color to that, if you recall back in 2013 when we did our second Jubilee and we had our first Jubilee Festival bottling, we were working with Heaven Hill to bottle a 15-year-old. And they gave us, I think it was 3 samples, maybe 4 samples, something from the 4th floor, something from the 7th floor, and then something from the 9th or 10th floor, something like that. And we ended up picking the Goldilocks one, right in the middle. But the one that was on the higher floor, the ABV on that spirit was over 80% alcohol. After 50, it'd been sitting there for 50 years. It had been sitting there for 15 years, lost a bunch of liquid, and was over 80% alcohol.
It's funny that you say that because the 80 just sounds absolutely mental to me. But I remember the sample bottle saying 160 proof. And when you see 160 proof, and you and I don't deal in proof day in and day out,
no.
But you see 160 proof and you think, oh, it's 160 proof, and then you move on with your business. And the thing that was always striking about that sample, because people, we've told this story in tastings once or twice, and people have always said, oh, did it blow your head off? And it never did.
No.
It didn't blow our heads off, but what happened was it really never made it to the back of the palate.
Yeah.
It just evaporated off the tongue.
Yep.
And I always remember that being so striking, that the ABV was so insane on it. But then the fact that, no, it didn't taste like drinking cleaning alcohol.
No.
It had flavour on the front of the palate, and then it just evaporated real fast.
Yeah. And I remember actually quite enjoying it. I also remember them saying the number of bottles that would come from the cask. I mean, the one that we selected was 67 some odd bottles. Anyway, part of the reason that I brought that up and added the color is to just once again highlight the differences between what warehousing looks like in the U.S. and what warehousing looks like in the UK, both from a logistical standpoint on where you can move stuff around, from just a temperature standpoint, right, a weather standpoint, and how your whiskey matures, and then also from a regulatory standpoint, where bourbon and rye has to be a new charred oak, and therefore it's going to get 2, 4, 6, 8 years old, and then your inventory turns because you fulfilled your need for that product. It's just quite interesting seeing the stark differences between the two, hearing the differences in the numbers, and as we're talking aloud, talking through the thought process, hearing why that makes sense for Scotland and why that makes sense for Four Roses. Yeah. Yep.
But also so funny to be thinking dunnage style in America, palletized in Scotland, right?
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me as well, looking at the palletized casks. Obviously, traditionally, casks have laid on their sides. They've been filled on their sides. They've been stored on their sides. The bunghole occurs at the high point of the cask as it lies on its side. Mm-hmm. You then stand it upright to put it on a pallet with a few of its friends. You then put a pallet on top of those, and you add another cask and a few of its friends. And then you add another pallet. You're increasing the pressure on the ends of the cask, but the bung is still in the middle of it.
Yeah.
All of that liquid is pressing up against that bung when it's sitting on its end, with greater pressure being applied from above. I'm curious to see if we'll, for those that engage with palletized warehousing, if we'll start to see bungs get moved onto heads, onto ends of casks.
Oh, I've seen that.
Then gets,
yeah.
As it then gets stood up on its end.
Yep, I've seen that. I'm trying to remember.
Or a permanent bung put in the bung hole and then another bung cut in a head.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's get out of here. We've said everything we came to say, and if we were going to respect the tight 35, we got to get out. A few bits and bobs before we get out of here. If you want to drop us a line, please feel free. info@singlecastnation.com or questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. No E in whiskey. Thanks to the Herald. Thanks to the AP for these articles. Thanks to Jess for sending in the one from the Herald. Reader view. You can also, if you're using Safari, you can also on the URL bar.
Yeah.
You can just go to the left side and there's like a little sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Click that and it'll give you reader view for any article. And all the ads disappear, all the pop-ups disappear. It's life-changing. Thanks to Bert for that bit of information. Thanks to you, Joshua Hatton. And as always, thanks to our dear listeners. We'll be back 2 weeks, another episode of Extra Extra. Till then, peace.
Peace.